when Bashar Assad took over, he was an eye doctor in London. He was described as a computer-loving technocrat and an eye doctor in London. His wife is British, and people thought he might be moderate. Bashar al-Assad, there was an idea of, oh, Hafez Assad has died, and now here's his son, this, British-educated potential moderate. And look how that came out. I mean, I think he met with the Queen. There's pictures of him meeting Nancy Pelosi. But it was a different time.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to Highly Conflicted, where we unpack the news inside Trump world and what might be coming down next at Mar-a-Lago. Trump is not even the president yet, but he was effectively treated like he was already in office as he traveled to France over the weekend to attend the rededication of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. On the sidelines of the visit, he met with French President Emmanuel Macron and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in a trilateral meeting where, as we understand it, the three men talked about the EU, NATO, and the future of the Ukraine conflict. But less than 24 hours later, another foreign storyline crashed into Trump as rebel forces swept into Damascus, the capital of Syria, and toppled the regime of Bashar al-Assad, bringing a stunning end to the Assad family's decades-long reign. Now, euphoria around Assad's ouster is mixed in with trepidation about the future of the country. And adding to this mix, of course, Trump's embattled Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth may just get enough votes to be confirmed in the Senate next year, which can make things even more uncertain for the NATO alliance. In short, Trump is about to inherit real uncertainty in the region, and how the US proceeds next will have major ramifications. Russia, for instance, still has military bases in Syria after backing Assad for decades. What will happen to those? And does this mean Russia is on the back foot, an opening that the US can exploit? And finally, will Trump and his potential next director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who has expressed sympathies towards Russia and the Assad regime, be taken for a ride with the intelligence reports and the negotiations to come? To unpack all of these really tricky conversations to which we really don't have answers yet. It's still very, very early. But on today's pod, I'm joined by Patricia Zengerle, an award-winning correspondent for Reuters who covers national security and foreign policy from her perch on Capitol Hill. She is really some of the most thoughtful reporters on the Hill and has been covering the Senate for a very, very long time. So, Tricia, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Let's start with Syria. What has been the US approach in recent years about how to address the conflict there, and how has it evolved through the different administrations?
It's varied widely. I'm thinking back to 2013 when Obama was president, and remember the famous red lines for the use of chemical weapons, and he was on the verge of ordering strikes on Syria over the chemical weapons. And then he backed off at the last minute, really angering a lot of hawks, and a lot of also including his allies they felt almost embarrassed that they were all caught up, like the Democrats had gotten in line to say, no, it's okay, this is an important thing. And then during Trump, I'd say he was probably assertive, but over the years it wound down. And with the Biden administration, Syria's been on the back burner.
So as the Senate now comes back to deal with the end of Assad, and they're looking at this, a lot of people a lot of these senators who have been on Senate Foreign Affairs, Senate Armed Services, they've been there a long time. And as they come back now to DC after the break and they try and assess the situation, what is the perspective from the Senate, which of course, technically, controls kind of military spending and defense budgets through the NDAA, and then also, I guess, technically speaking, has the final say on whether to declare war, for instance. I mean, how does the Senate look at it?
The Senate's assessing, Hugo.
Always assessing.
Always assessing. The world's greatest deliberative body. But in this case, I think they're justified because no one knows what's going to happen. I mean, the HTS is still designated as a terrorist organization by the US government. And they originally were associated with Islamist militant groups. They've backed off that in the last few years, or and they've been making issues saying, we want a unity government. We want everyone in together. We're done with fighting. Now we want to run the country. In Idlib, the area where they've been in power for some time, they've been having functions. They've even given out identity cards. And in Aleppo, which they took over earlier in the week, they've been trying to set up a government. People have been walking down the streets holding loaves of bread again. So they are trying to, I think the verbiage we use here at Reuters is soften their image. But if you're a US senator, you're obviously going to sit back and you're going to watch and you're going to see how it comes out, because the last thing you need is a vote to authorize to send vast amounts of money to an organization that then turns out to be, and I'm not saying this will happen, but this is US politics that turns out to be, way more radical than they're comfortable with.
So the situation, in essence, is you have kind of rebels connected to the Houthis who, as I understand it, then have a terrorist designation, and yet they have ousted Assad, who the U.S. has also been in conflict with, backed by Russia, who is also a strategic adversary. So you have a melting pot of three enemies fighting each other, and the US, I guess, now has to decide who it's going to back, to what degree, and whether the US wants to have greater influence in the region. Because up until now, the US has had no influence on Assad. It's Russia and Putin has
And Iran.
taken hold, and Iran. And I mean, Russia even has bases there. And from an outside looking in, you would think, this is a prime opportunity for the US to make inroads here and try and become the strategic player in the region.
Absolutely. However, what if the US makes inroads, and how do you make inroads? And then they turn out to be far more radical than than Washington's comfortable with. I mean, remember, I bet you don't remember. I'm saying that because it was so long ago. Around 2001 or 2002, exactly, when Bashar Assad took over. He was an eye doctor in London. He was described as a computer-loving technocrat and an eye doctor in London. His wife is British, and people thought he might be moderate. Bashar al-Assad, there was an idea of, Hafez Assad has died, and now here's his son, this, British-educated potential moderate. And look how that came out. I mean, I think he met with the Queen. There's pictures of him meeting Nancy Pelosi. But it was a different time. So there is that. But yes, I would definitely agree that this is a chance for the United States to have some influence. You've also got Turkey in the mix. And then, of course, you have Israel, which has said, Netanyahu's government has said that it was going to conduct airstrikes to wipe out Syria's heavy weapons. So it's a really potent mix.
No, and it's all very uncertain. So let's just speculate here, because we're free to do so, and really, who knows anything about how Syria's how the Syria situation unfolds. What would be beneficial in your view for the US to do? I mean, surely, for instance, Russian military bases in Syria, it makes sense to probably take those out, or maybe take them over. I don't know if the rebels are open to negotiating that way, because the Russians over the weekend, Putin's office issued a statement saying they wanted to enter into some sort of talks and they wanted to be part of the discussion going forward. So what is possible for the US here? And I mean, we talked about whether what they might be comfortable with, but what is possible in your view?
I think what's possible, I can't imagine the United States attacking Russian military bases. That would be, even for Trump, I think that would be a little too warlike. I think what's possible is if the rebels get established, if there isn't a lot more chaos, if there aren't deaths in the streets, for the United States to find a way to send money for rebuilding, for setting up institutions, maybe aid with, a gift from the, if they need it, a gift from the United States, the people of the United States. You've seen the bags that the country sends. I mean, I was looking up some stuff, and the U.S. gives a lot of money for humanitarian relief in Syria. Since 2013, $18 billion. And last year, the fiscal year that ended in September, $1.2 billion.
Hmm.
So aid money, humanitarian assistance is something that the U.S. could do.
And do you think, as a result of these developments, then, that Russia militarily is on the back foot? Because, I mean, they really supported Assad, right? I mean, this was almost a proxy war for them. And at the same time, they're in Ukraine.
That's it.
As part of that conflict.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's it. It sure looks like Russia is so stretched with Ukraine that it just couldn't come along to fight for Assad the way that it had been, that it could after the Arab Spring. Yeah.
So
And
how
so
does
they're
that affect the
stretched.
Ukraine conflict then? As far as the US is concerned, depending on what happens with Pete Hegseth's defense secretary nomination, and we will get into that, but even Republicans in the Senate, there are a lot of Republicans who have been very pro continuing to send aid to Ukraine, military aid, and weapons and money. Do you think there's now an increased appetite for that? I mean, because there is also this tension in the US where Trump's allies want to pare back funding, but there are plenty of Republicans in the Senate who see Ukraine as the US's proxy war against Russia, right?
Yeah. And there's also the argument that the fall of Assad shows that the U.S. proxy war against Russia has worked.
Hmm.
That Russia has been so weakened that he couldn't send his jets over to Syria to, bomb the rebels and stop them. And that argument is being made as an argument for the U.S. continuing to keep pressure on Russia. But there is undoubtedly a weariness. The U.S. has sent a lot of money. What is it? $115 billion has been approved for the Ukraine conflict since it started. And there's definitely an appetite for that to slow down, especially as Ukraine has not been having the same success on the battlefield as it did.
And do you think that changes now that McConnell's not Senate majority or the Senate Republican leader? McConnell was a big proponent of sending resources to Ukraine. I don't know the dynamic as well as you do. I mean, John Thune is Thune of the same mindset? I mean, and if he is, will he be able to rally the Senate Republican conference around that idea?
I think Thune is basically of the same mindset. Thune is not as big a talker because obviously he hasn't been the leader, but generally he's known for being quieter and not speaking out as much as McConnell. My guess would be that he also has a different conference. He has more people who are closer to Trump. He's not working, it's not a Democratic majority starting in September. You go from Sherrod Brown to Bernie Moreno. You go from Bob Casey to Yikes, I'm spacing on the name of the new guy in Pennsylvania. Sorry.
McCormick.
McCormick, thank you. So it's a big shift. And then you have Trump and Vance was the poster man for anti-Ukraine sentiment. And I think it's going to be a lot harder. And I think there's going to be a lot of pressure not to give as much money to Ukraine.
Even though strategically this may be the opportunity in which arguably you want to push harder because Russia had just suffered a setback in Syria and may want to pull back its resources in Ukraine depending on how it continues.
And a lot of people have over the years gone back to that 2013 Obama Red Lines incident I talked about and said he missed a great opportunity to shut it down and make a change and effect a change and save a lot of lives and a lot of chaos and a lot of destruction and to show American strength.
Do you see that
And
conversation happening on the
strength.
Hill? Do you see that conversation happening on the Hill, that red lines point?
Yeah, it was, every time there's a big incident, you get a lot of these statements. Our inboxes gets flooded. And a lot of them mention things like Obama showed weakness and Trump will show strength, and Trump administration was strong on Syria and Obama was weak and Biden was weak, and hopefully Trump can now be strong. Yeah, I do see that conversation happening on the Hill. And it's also an argument, I suppose, that you could make to win over the Trump people who do seem to enjoy a narrative of strength.
Yeah. So then pivoting back to domestic issues, because this is the third storyline that emerged over the weekend, which is Pete Hegseth appears to be slowly but surely narrowing the number of detractors or reducing the number of detractors for his confirmation. Our reporting was Senator Joni Ernst, one of the holdouts, who was opposing Hegseth's nomination. She herself had spoken out against sexual assault, had been a victim of sexual assault herself. There was some suggestion from Trump world that they thought they could get Joni on side because they would give her an off-ramp. They would, because she has been not zealously advocating for Hegseth. In fact, has been non-committal about whether to support his nomination. But there does seem to be a sentiment now that they can find an off-ramp for her, not least because she was accused of seeking to tank Hegseth's nomination to advance her own bid. She was on a short list for the defense secretary role. So if they do manage to get Joni Ernst on board, how many other potential no votes could be out there? I mean, maybe Murkowski, Senator Lisa Murkowski, but do you see any other major? I mean, behind closed doors. I mean, you cover this. I mean, behind closed doors, do you see other senators really pushing against Hegseth?
I don't see. They're keeping it very, very quiet if they do. But one name that has come up a bunch of times is Mitch McConnell himself. He's not expected to run again. Certainly, if you read his book, he has some issues with President-elect Trump. And he is a big advocate for Ukraine. He takes military issues super seriously. And he's in line to be chairman of the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. So I've heard, and I know you saw that he was one of the supposed 6 who got Matt Gaetz's nomination derailed. So that's one name that I've heard being bandied around. Obviously, McConnell keeps things very close to the vest for, it's his nature. And also he's been Republican leader. So it's not like he's going to go out and chat, but that's one name. So it could be McConnell, Murkowski. They need 4 though. They need 4 because three he survives because Vance can break a tie.
Because Collins seems to be, on balance, pretty deferential to presidential picks, presidential cabinet picks, or has been in the past. And certainly it seems that Trump world is looking at Collins as someone whose support they may ultimately get.
He's throwing the other thing about, a lot of them, and Joni Ernst is one. She's up for re-election in 2026. And she's from Iowa, and Trump won Iowa by about 13%. And has not been one to go out there publicly before, as far as I've seen. She is known as a strong advocate for the military, particularly on personnel issues, right? And the fact that she's a sexual assault survivor, she's also described herself as a combat veteran. And you have Hegseth saying women shouldn't be in combat. So what does that say about her career? But politics are really strong, and Trump is really strong, and he's running the party. And for whatever reason, he's decided that, doesn't it feel to you like he's throwing everything behind this nomination? Like the appearances, the quotes, the comments, like he's all in on it. At least so far, it seems to be a lot stronger than the Tulsi Gabbard, speaking of Syria, nomination. Yeah. So
That's the funny thing about Trump, was he really didn't support Hegseth's nomination that vocally during the week that he had real problems. This is when the sex assault headlines were coming out, and then the drinking, the excess drinking headlines then came out. And it was only after he hit, well, as we reported at The Guardian, it was only after Hegseth and his team seemed to get in a place with Joni Ernst where they were like, well, we could get Joni on side if we, for instance, the concession, one of the concessions being discussed is for Pete to walk back his comments about, women shouldn't be serving in combat roles. And if he walked that back, or other more extreme positions he's held, then Ernst would get that off ramp to support his nomination. And
that's an off ramp. Yeah. You can say I made a difference by getting him to change his positions and to listen to us, that it was a two-way conversation. And they're meeting again just about now. It's at 2:00 today. The two of them are supposed to meet.
And they brought the big guns out for this one, actually, because from what I heard, Don Jr.'s team is on the Hill for this for this meeting, and they are running a full court press on Joni to get her on board, because their reasoning goes, if you can get the sexual assault survivor to back Pete, then a lot of these allegations go away.
Yeah, and you saw last week at least. Hegseth was walking around holding hands with his wife as they walked. Well, I was going to say his current wife. Sorry.
His latest wife. the third wife.
As he walked down the hallways, which I've covered a lot of nomination processes and confirmation processes, but obviously I haven't covered them all. But to me, it looked unusual. Private. So how does this play then? In their office. How does this play? You also have to remember, as far as sexual assault, this is just a fact. You were dealing with the president himself, who has faced many accusations and assertions, and indeed a court ruling involving allegations.
In fact, he was adjudicated. He was adjudicated that way.
Yeah, he was adjudicated that way. So I think it's reminding a lot of people of Brett Kavanaugh when there were allegations against him, and we're hearing many, many of the same lines, that she should come forward, right? It's anonymous accusations, that the alleged victim should come forward herself and go on the record. I've heard that line from a bunch of senators, and obviously
Lindsey Graham,
a ton. Lindsey Graham among them, and he's one of the most important voices on foreign affairs issues and defense issues in Congress. He's really influential, and he's going to be he's in line to be chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee that oversees the State Department budget and diplomacy. So he's close to Trump on many issues, but in the past, and Trump won, Graham stood up against Trump when he tried to cut the State Department budget very strongly. I did a story about Graham calling Trump's plans insane. So it could be something where he's picking his spots. Like, this is a personnel thing. We'll give him who he wants. How much do secretaries of defense do anyway? I'm not saying they don't. I'm just saying you can see this, right? Figureheads. The real work is done below, and then there's also this whole idea we haven't even Hugo, we haven't talked about wokeness and how Hegseth is anti-wokeness and DEI, and that is an astonishing amount of what I hear in my covering of military issues. Is this whole idea that that needs to be wiped out of that somehow
But
the
at the
United
Senate
States
level, you mean at the Senate,
it,
at the member level, at the aides
at the member
level?
level, at the
Right.
Senate level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
well, that's one of the things with McConnell, right? It's the Trump team, according to our reporting, has gone to McConnell and said, "Look, you might not like Pete Hegseth and his drinking issues and his sexual misconduct allegations, but you guys surely are aligned on the need to end DEI and the need to end woke in the military and to basically have a much more conservative, mostly conservative approach to the Pentagon." Is that I mean, is that the sort of argument that would win over McConnell potentially?
I don't think so. McConnell
Interesting.
doesn't get too much into that stuff. McConnell's about things like keeping a robust defense budget, keeping the military strong. He's an old school Republican in terms of the United States as the leader of the free world and should act like the leader of the free world as opposed to the America First stuff.
Hmm.
I haven't ever heard him go on about those things. Like, no, that's not him. But I've heard other people talk about it at length, including, I mean, Adam Smith, the top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, because they're doing the NDA this week. That's the giant defense authorization bill. And it has a provision that would ban gender affirming care for the children of service members. And it's a social issue. You know, it's the hot button social issue. And Smith came out with a statement last night saying that Speaker Johnson is embracing this because he wants to be reelected Speaker. It was one of those very much like, tell us what you really think, sir, you know, because you're like, so words are not being minced.
So, looking forward to a confirmation hearing. Let's say Pete Hegseth survives that far. How does that unfold? I mean, are you gonna? Do you think you will effectively get certain senators pushing for? Well, you get certain senators endorsing him and trying to help him along. Obviously, whether that's the Lindsey Grahams of the world or whoever, and JD Vance will surely be on the hill. But do you foresee a scenario where Democrats can get some of these accusers in the hearing to testify, like Christine Blasey Ford testified effectively against Brett Kavanaugh for his confirmation hearing?
It's a really interesting question. Of course, would you, after you watch what happened to her, would you do it? One of his main accusers was at a Republican conference, so she's probably a Republican, one would assume. I would be surprised, especially because it didn't make any difference. So why would you? I do think the Democrats will pull out everything they can, if nothing else, to weaken and embarrass the president as much as possible, which of course raises the whole political issue. But I think after the last campaign that Democrats, you know, they aren't going to care. I think it's going to be a scene and it's going to be ugly. And I once covered a 9-hour confirmation hearing that was for Rex Tillerson. And I think that this one is going to be longer if it does indeed happen, and crazier.
I mean, could Democrats get some of these accusers to testify only to Senate Democrats, to the Senate Democratic Conference, and maybe issue a statement later or a report or whatever? I mean, there does seem to be the sense that, especially among Democrats on the Hill, that they need to hear from some of these women, or they want to hear from some of these women. I mean, while they still, while they still kind of have power now, can they, before the new Congress comes into session in January? There doesn't seem to be an appetite to subpoena anyone or to bring them in for committee hearing, even behind closed doors, right?
I haven't heard anything about that as a possibility. I mean, Jack Reed is the current chairman of the Armed Services Committee, and he's a thorough senator. He's hardworking. He's conscientious, but he works a lot across the aisle, and he's not a fire breather. I've never seen him do anything that somebody could dismiss as a stunt. I'm not saying he shouldn't, obviously. I mean, I don't know, but on the one hand, nothing would surprise me, but on the other hand, that would surprise me.
That's
He's
interesting.
just not the type. Yeah.
So Hegseth might actually survive. Well, it's interesting to see how it all shakes out. Trisha, it's always great to talk with you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm Hugo Lowell, a senior political correspondent at The Guardian. Special thanks to our guest today, Patricia Zengerle from Reuters.